Good morning, folks. Welcome to another of our daily devotions. Today we're in Psalm 15 again, and we're thinking about verse number 3. In our last study in verse 2, we saw that the psalmist said that one of the characteristics of a person who really enjoys fellowship with God is that he speaks the truth in his heart. That's a positive statement. In verse 3, he speaks of using our tongue negatively. He says that the person who enjoys fellowship with God is someone who does not slander. Some translations have the word backbite, and the meaning of that is very simple. It means to bite behind a person's back. Of course, we don't slander someone with our tongue. We don't backbite against a person with our tongue before we have done it in our hearts. What's in our hearts comes out through our mouth. Remember what we said in our last study. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Charles Spurgeon, the great Baptist preacher from the past, he once said that some men's tongues bite more than their teeth. The tongue's not made of steel, but it can cut as badly as a razor-edged sword. You remember what James says in his letter when he's speaking about the tongue. He says that the tongue is a restless evil and it's full of deadly poison. With the tongue we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and salt water? Sadly, it does. We all know only too well that we are prone to this sin of slander. And we see examples of it in the scriptures. Perhaps the best example, or the worst example, I suppose you might say, is that of Potiphar's wife. You remember how she slandered Joseph to her husband, telling her husband that Joseph tried to basically rape her when he had done no such thing. He had done the exact opposite. You remember how Jezebel, Ahab's wife, slandered Naboth and got men to say wicked, untrue, sinful things against Naboth in order to character assassinate him and ultimately to have him put to death. The writer of the book of Proverbs says, whoever spreads slander is a fool. Proverbs 10 and verse 18. And this is a very important aspect of our speech, brethren. I was just thinking how much trouble, how much pain, how much division would be cured in churches, in families, if no one slandered others. How much more united our congregations would be if all slander was removed. If verse 3 was one of the watchwords of every Christian, how different church life would be. But here's the point. It should be the watchword of the Christian. He does not backbite. He does not slander with his tongue. Now, truth be told, many of us, in fact probably most of us, have been guilty of this sin at some stage. Well, we ought to be ashamed of it. We ought to acknowledge it to God. We ought to confess it to God. And we ought to pray for grace to overcome this particular sin. We should be on our guard against it. And when we are tempted to speak untrue, slanderous, character-destroying words about another person, we should not allow those words to get past our lips. But more than that, we should go to God and we should seek God's grace to overcome Even the very thought of uttering such words against a person in our hearts, what's in our hearts comes out of our mouths. If we have slanderous words to speak to people, we have slanderous thoughts in our hearts. The man who enjoys fellowship with God, the woman, the young person who enjoys fellowship with God is a person who not only speaks the truth in their heart, but he does not slander, does not backbite against his neighbour. May God help us to think about this and, by God's grace, to more and more overcome it. Have a great day, folks. God bless.